Inshallah. Nobody's run the mic through it. Okay, so there we go. So to start off with, there's a central hadith that actually I'm writing about because my dissertation is on beauty as well. And this hadith is probably well known to most of you. It's Abdullah ibn Masud radiallahu anh. He says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that no one who has a weight of a seed of arrogance in his heart will enter paradise. And there's multiple narrations related to this. One is a mustard seed, one is a weight of an ant, and so on. And so no one that has even the slightest amount of arrogance will enter paradise. So a man who was there, he said that, but a man who likes to have nice clothing and nice shoes. Is there a reason for the echo? Is it the two mics close together or?
Shouldn't be. Can I turn it off? This podium mic, isn't it?
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Is that better? Okay, I don't know. Sorry, the echo was bugging me. So the man said, but what about a man who likes to have nice clothes and nice shoes? So this is where the Prophet ﷺ said that, Inna Allaha jameel wa yuhibbul jamal. Indeed, Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty. But what I find fascinating about this hadith is that there are two concepts that are actually juxtaposed. It's not just about beauty. It's actually also about arrogance, because the hadith doesn't stop there. Usually people, they give you abstractions of hadith. So they'll give you the abstraction of this part. Inna Allaha jameel wa yuhibbul jamal. Indeed, Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty. And you'll see this on Instagram posts and things like that. And it's just that part. Or people will give you the last part, where the Prophet ﷺ defines arrogance. He says, Al-kibar, batrul haqq wa ghamtun nas. And arrogance is to reject the truth and look down upon people. Like I said, what I find particularly interesting about this is these are two concepts that are juxtaposed with each other. In other words, beauty and arrogance. Can I have the next slide? Okay, so now that's kind of the hadith I want to start off with. Let's start off with the world that we live in and why this is going to be very important. You see, with a lot of our time that's spent on social media, we find that because we're so engaged in this online space, it can be very difficult to now tell what is true and what is false. And you might think that you're kind of, I'm Muslim, I read the Quran, I read Hadith, I'm immune to this. But in fact, I would say that even many of us, when we engage with stuff online, we don't realize that a lot of the content has been curated, has been selected, not by you, but by others to put you down a certain, let's say, space. So you're engaged with content that's being chosen for you. So just a simple, let's say if you're watching YouTube videos, and those YouTube videos that come up on the side, who picks those? It's actually based on an algorithm, based on your search history, based on so many different factors. So what happens is that you start to enter into this box. You're almost quarantined in this kind of like echo chamber, whether you realize it or not. And so a lot of the concepts that you're thinking about, or you're searching, or you're watching on YouTube, they're just kind of a reflection of what you've already searched for. So any sort of engagement outside of that box, in a sense, you don't have it. Right, next slide. And so this is just a graphic, So for instance, when you do a search on Google, Google doesn't give out the same search results for every person, by the way. It gives it based on your own search history, your own information, your own, shopping trends and things like that. If you buy things from Amazon, you guys have Amazon here, right?
Yeah,
okay, good. We're still in the U.S. The flight was so long, I felt like I was supposed to go to immigration by the time I got here. And I was like, I don't take my passport out. This is great. Anyway, so what Google does is it looks at all of those factors and then gives you a response based on your own predisposition or your, let's say, internet predisposition. All right, next slide. So this is why you have, for instance, reports like this. Accurate stories rarely reach more than 1,000 people, yet most prominent false news items routinely reach between 1,000 and 100,000 people. Now the thing is that for us to now say what is true and what is false, yes, there is, like I said, you have a religious backdrop, you have the Quran, you have the Sunnah, but again, as we engage in the world that we live in, it becomes very important for us to know or to be able to navigate what is true and what is false. Next slide. All right. Actually, I'll skip this one. Go to the next one. All right. So with that said, in the world that we live in, my central thesis for tonight, and this might apply to you guys more than anyone else, right, is that the greater your exposure to beauty, and here I'm specifically saying natural beauty. What is that? Where am I? Maybe if I'm walking here, I think, and that mic might be on, right?
This is off.
That's off? Okay.
Yeah.
So, central thesis. The greater your exposure to beauty, the greater your ability to see truth as it really is. So, in other words, the more exposure you have to natural beauty, to the ocean, to the sky, to the mountains, to just natural beauty, the more your ability to determine what is true and what is false. In other words, your ability to see truth goes up. Okay, that's my central thesis. All right, next slide, please. Okay, and why is this true? Because what I'm stating is because natural beauty facilitates awe, and which leads to a heightened cognition and a decrease in the ego. So two things here. Remember, I started off with a hadith which juxtaposed beauty and ego. So what I'm saying here is the more exposure you have to beauty, the lower your ego will be. And why does that happen is because you experience something called awe. Now, awe is a very kind of difficult thing to quantify, to define even, right? How many people have been on Umrah or Hajj? Raise your hands. A few people? Okay, brother, wait, keep your hand up. How did you feel when you saw the Kaaba for the first time? You can't explain it, right? You can't put it in words. How did you feel? It's an amazement. I remember the first time that I went, and, we had gotten there, I think, very early morning, and I was with my wife, and I walked in and I saw the Kaaba for the first time. This is before they had, the flood of visas being open and everyone, in the whole planet being there. So it was relatively empty. The first time I saw it, I couldn't believe it. I looked over at my wife, and she had tears in her eyes, right? It's overwhelming. But if you were to ask, how do you describe that feeling? It's very difficult. It is a type of awe, but even awe doesn't really capture it. Because it's like you feel small in a certain way and scared in a certain way, but not scared like I'm running for my life scared. But again, it's difficult to describe. So what I'm saying is when a person's in that state of khushu' or khashya or awe, I guess if you could call it that, what you find is your ability to recognize truth becomes enhanced. Okay? And that feeling of awe, it doesn't just happen when you look at the Kaaba. It's when you're looking at something just that's just overwhelming, that overwhelms the senses. Like if you look at just a beautiful waterfall, or the night sky that's full of stars and so on. Okay, next slide. Okay, so like I said, exposure to natural beauty can help us decrease cognitive biases, and that should be number 2. Wait, stay there. Exposure to natural beauty can help us decrease ego. So 2 things are happening. Your ability to understand things and reason, your cognition becomes sharper, and your ego goes down. With the coupling of these 2 things, when you are exposed to natural beauty, it helps us to see truth as truth. Next slide. Okay. So, let me start off with, is seeing truth a function of the individual and his rationality only? Meaning, when you have to adjudicate between something being true and something being false, is rationality your only truth, your only tool? How many people say yes? That rationality, if I think about it hard enough, if I conjugate upon it hard enough, I can know whether it's true or not. Nobody?
I would agree.
You think so?
Yes.
Okay, all right, one guy. The rest of you think what? Or you've already bought into my thesis. It's done. Khalas, I can just go home now. All right. How many people have seen this experiment before, this optical illusion? All right, I think a few people probably have. If you study here in the US, I'm pretty sure you have. It's known as a Franz Muller-Lyer experiment. And what it basically is that the line in the middle, outside of the kind of the pointy lines on the left and the lines go up on top, these two lines, for many people, they appear to be different lengths. So how many people see them as different lengths? Not whether they are different lengths, but you see them as different lengths. Okay. How many people see it as the same length? Wait, you raised your hand twice. No, you didn't? All right, okay. So some of you see it as the same length, some of you see it as different lengths, right? Again, I'm not asking what's true, I'm just asking what you see. Okay? Next slide. So what we know from the experiment is that they are the exact same length. Now this experiment goes back to the 1960s when it was first done. Next slide. And one of the things that they wanted to find out, because it was done in the 60s, it was primarily done in Western countries, or what we call, people that, who are weird. But I don't mean weird as in weird. I mean the acronym WEIRD, right? Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic. Meaning in the 1960s, when this illusion was presented to people, over 80% of the people saw the lines being different lengths. So what they wanted to do, they said, look, is this a function just of the modern Western world? And so they took this experiment out to other places. Particularly, there were two tribes. One was called the Suku tribe, and one was called the Bidi tribe, right? One was northern Angola and the Ivory Coast. What they found was the exact opposite. When they were exposed to the same two lines, almost 90% or over 90% saw them as equal. So now here's the thing. When it comes to trusting one of our senses, you might find that where you live and where you grow up might have an impact on what you see. Now, why is it that people from the Suku tribe and the Bidi tribe did not see the difference in line size like people generally in the West did? Well, one of the researchers came up with a theory as to why. Next slide. It's because he started looking at the architecture that's generally present in Western countries. And what you'll notice is in Western countries, most of the architecture is very angular, very straight. Even the building we're in right now, you notice that there are very sharp angles. A little bit of roundness, but generally angles. Everything is very angular, and that's a function of the modern world. In the pre-modern world, you don't have that sort of strict angular structures, right? And by the way, these angular structures, does anyone studying architecture by any chance? No one? Okay. These angular structures, as they appeared in modernity, first in the West and then transported to the rest of the world, why were they put in place? It wasn't to enhance beauty, it was to enhance utility. Meaning it was found that people can become most productive in these type of structures. And of course, this whole kind of culture of productivity carries on till today, right? That's why they make your offices really cold, because they want you to not fall asleep, right? Anyway, so what you'll find is that in these angular structures, you being in the presence of that angular structure day in and day out, you develop something like a depth perception. So therefore, when you see these two lines, it's as you're perceiving two things, like one is deeper than the other, and therefore the lines are actually of different length. In other words, what you see. Next slide. However, people in the Bidi tribes and the Suku tribes live in structures like this. This is how they grow up. So everything is very natural, very round, very, there's nothing that's, seems like it's built for utility. It's almost built within nature. And that's where they spend their entire life. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is that, next slide. The reason I'm mentioning this, and like I mentioned, your environment can have an impact on your cognition, is why I'm saying this. In other words, where you live can have an impact on how you determine what is true and what is not true. And what you'll find is even architecture going from the pre-modern to the modern to the what in now this horrific age of the postmodern, if you want to call it that, you'll see that in pre-modern times, much of the architecture that was built had to do with being at one with nature, or emulating, if we look at Alhambra, emulating conceptualizations of Jannah, right? That's essentially what they're doing. And conceptualization of Jannah, as when you read the Quran you know that it talks about rivers. It talks about trees. It talks about things that we're very familiar with in the natural world. It does not talk about air-conditioned buildings, obviously, right? But as you go from the pre-modern to the modern, again, you have those angular structures. All right, next slide. So your environment can have an impact on you. All right. So what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to your own senses, you may not be able to rely upon yourself 100% to judge what is true and what is not true. So if you can't rely upon yourself, how about relying upon others? Because by the way, this is part of our tradition too. Hadith studies are built upon trustworthiness of narrators. And those trustworthy of narrators is how you adjudicate between, is this hadith sahih, is it da'if, is it mawdu', what is the rating of this hadith? On a number of factors. So testimonial knowledge is part and parcel of our tradition. In fact, it's what builds the Quran, in the sense that we know it hasn't changed. By the way, can I take a bit of a detour? Am I allowed to do that? Or do you want me to stick very precisely with this topic? Can I do that? Sorry? It's my world. I don't know, man. I've gone to some communities. Anyway, okay, so here's a slight tangent, okay? When I talk about testimonial knowledge, and I say, okay, this is what the Quran is built upon, sometimes we hear that and it's a very abstract concept. So a few years ago, I was at the University of Arkansas, and they invited me out to do a certain program. I forgot what it was. And I remember there was a group of Christian missionaries that was sitting in like the front row. And they asked the question during the Q&A time. They said, how do you know the Quran is preserved? Okay. So how do we know the Quran is preserved? Let's make this somewhat interactive. Trust the narrators. Okay. Anybody else?
No inconsistency.
No inconsistency? Okay. Yes, back there, nice and loud. There's a lot of hafidin of the Quran. Okay, yes. There's an isnad that goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, all of this is correct, right? You talk about the sanad, you talk about hufad, you talk about narrators. Okay, that's great. But when you have non-Muslims that are asking you that, there has to be a way where you can say, wait a minute, you've got to kind of seal the deal. So just saying narrators, hufad, or sanad and so on, obviously they don't know what isnad is. So I had to kind of express it in a way that they could understand it. So what I told them, I said, look, let's do a thought experiment. And in this thought experiment, I want you to imagine that you have the Prophet ﷺ, and he narrates or recites the Quran to 10 people. Now, if you wanted to make a change in the Quran, how many people would you need to agree with you? 10 people, right? And of course the Prophet ﷺ, because he's still alive. So now let's say those 10 people each teach 10 people, 10 more people, each of them. So how many people do we have now? 10 100. Times 10, 100. Now if you want to insert something into the Quran or take something out of the Quran, how many people do you need? How many people need to agree? 100 plus the original 10. 110 plus the Prophet ﷺ, right? Let's say those 100 now teach 10 people. Now how many people do you have? 1,000 plus the 100 plus the 10. Let's say the Prophet ﷺ has passed away. Okay? Now, how many people do you need altogether?
Thousands.
Man, I thought you all were engineering students.
1,111.
1,110.
10.
Okay? Okay, you need the agreement of 1,110 people. Let me tell you something. When it's late at night and I haven't had dinner and my wife hasn't had dinner and we're thinking, what should we have for dinner? We should get Uber Eats. Great idea, honey. Let's get Uber Eats. All right, so what would you like to have? Oh, I don't care. Whatever you want. What do you want? Oh, I don't care either. Whatever you want. Well, how about some Chinese? Nah, I'm not going to go to Chinese. Okay, I thought you said you don't care. Yeah, but just anything but Chinese. I'm like, okay. Then she says, okay, how about burgers? I'm like, yeah, I'm not really in the mood of burgers. She's like, didn't you just say you don't care? I'm like, yeah, but burgers, like I was thinking about Chinese. Okay. We're going to keep going until about midnight where you can't order anything. Okay? That's 2 people trying to agree on what to eat. And now you're talking about 1,110 people to come to an agreement. If 2 people can't agree on something, how difficult is it for 1,110 people to agree? And what's most fascinating is the further you are away on a temporal basis, in terms of time, the more certain you are that there were no changes. Because this chain, what we call a tawatur chain, gets larger and larger and larger generation after generation after generation. Right? So, I'm telling this to these non-Muslims. They're like, okay, that's great. And I realized something. I realized that the MSA that had invited me, they all went, they left me there with these 10 missionaries. And I was like, man, what a bunch of rude people, man. I mean, they invited me all the way here. I mean, Arkansas is not as far as Hawaii, so if you guys did it, I'd probably be really upset. But that's, but Arkansas is still, it's like they're just gone. I'm like, where did they go? And so I realized that when they had invited me, they told me that, we can only invite you on this date, and Ramadan might start on that day. And then it struck me, I said, wait a minute, probably what happened, they sighted the moon, and they're in the masjid. So I told these 10 people, I said, look, why don't you come with me? And all of this stuff I just talked about, that's very abstract, and that's very nice, and that's great. But let me show you how this works as a living tradition. So we took them to the masjid, and what's going on in the masjid? Tarawih, right? Very atypical. It's not the rest of the months, right? Had I took them on a random Isha, maybe it would be a bit problematic. But they go in and they're part of this tradition that is not just abstract information. It's something that they're experiencing now directly. Anyway, so coming back to testimony, that was my brief tangent, which is related to what I'm going to say in a little bit too, talking about abstraction and experience. But we'll get to that in a second. So if we can't trust ourselves 100%, can we trust others? And the thing is, we do rely on other people for information, even outside of the Quran and Hadith and things like that, on a day-to-day basis. Like no one can have the functionality or no one can have the knowledge across the board to live, perfectly, right? Like you need doctors, you need mechanics, you need an electrician, you need people to help you out. And this is why, this is Elizabeth Fricker, yes. She said, it should be immediately obviously that in the conditions of modern life, we rely hugely on the epistemic and practical skills of others. For example, I allow my car mechanic to find what the fault is with my car when it won't start, and then to fix it for me, and one relies on one's doctor to use information from symptoms and medical tests to diagnose what is wrong with one and then to prescribe an appropriate treatment. So we rely on other people. So perhaps you could say, look, okay, I may make an epistemic mistake or a cognitive mistake, okay? But there are other people. They have knowledge. And so if they have knowledge and I trust their backdrop, well then, if we work together, we can get to the truth. Next slide. All right. What is this?
Art.
It's not a hard question. I know I've studied theophilosophy, but it's not America, by the way. It's a map of the world. There is America there, but it is a map of the whole world, okay? Everyone agree that this is a map?
Yep.
Okay, I think we're all in agreement. Okay. Not accurate. Okay, I'll give you that. It's not 100% accurate. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. What is this?
Map too.
It's also a map. It's also a map of the world. But you'll notice something very peculiar. Go to the last slide for a second.
Oh.
No, the last one, the one before this one. What you'll notice is this map, it shows Alaska and the United States and Canada, Europe, Russia. All of these people have a cardinal direction of north. They're top, they're upwards, right? And South America, a big part of Africa, Australia, the Southeast Asian islands and so on, they are south. Their cardinal direction is south, and they're on the bottom. All right, now go to the next slide. What you'll notice is this map is actually flipped. So there was a cartographer, someone who draws maps, in the 12th century by the name of Muhammad al-Idrisi, rahimahullah ta'ala. And when he drew a map, he drew it like this. In other words, he put Africa on top, and he put Europe on the bottom. Anyone want to venture to guess why? He's from Morocco? It's a good guess. I mean, he's from Al-Andalus, so maybe he has ties to Morocco. Anybody else? Just give it a shot. What do you think? Why would someone draw it this way and someone draw it that way? Okay, I'll tell you something even more interesting. The last map, go to the one before this. Yeah, this map, it's a reflection of Ptolemy's map. Anyone know who Ptolemy is? Another cartographer, right? So Ptolemy drew this, and this is what comes down to us, and this is what we use in our schools and so on and so forth. Okay? So Ptolemy draws it like this. Next slide. Muhammad al-Idrisi draws it like this. What's really interesting is that, yeah, you want to venture to guess? Yeah, okay, go for it.
I think maybe a little bit similar to what the brother said, is from his worldview. So from what is fact to ill,
Right.
this is what south is.
But what part of his worldview? That's what's really interesting. It's his worldview, number one, because Muhammad al-Idrisi is a Muslim, and his worldview, who are the people that are dominant? Who are the people that are upon the truth? Who are the people that are upon the haqq?
Arabs.
The Arabs, right? The Muslims. And where is the majority of the Muslim world? It's Africa, right? Ptolemy, based on his worldview, who are the people that are dominant and where are they? Europe, Rome, and so on, right? And so he draws Europe on top. Now what's even more fascinating is that Muhammad al-Idrisi is from Spain, and Ptolemy is drawing his map in Egypt, right? Which is just interesting because they reside in the two opposite places. But the point is, which map is right? Let me ask you that. Which is the correct map now? The second one? They're both right. Okay. Gaif. Like one is up, one is down. Which one's right? Both. Right. Maybe right. Okay, go to the next slide. There's a certain problem here. If you were to travel to outer space, you have no way of anchoring yourself to know what is up and what is down. There's no concept of up and down. So therefore, someone said they're both right, or they both could be wrong, or meaning it's relative. Right? But does this, whether you think that, let's say America's on top, South America's on the bottom, does this have any real world consequences? In fact, it does. There were some very interesting studies that were done on the price that movers charge when going from north to south and south to north. In other words, the study was on cardinal direction and mover fees. So if someone's going to move your house, do they charge you different rates? And what they found on average is movers charge, on average, $200 to $250 more moving from south to north than north to south. Why? Did they do some deep statistical study on the difficulty of moving north to south? No, because they understood that in terms of perception, when you go from south to north on the map, it seems like you're going uphill. It seems like it's hard. So they charge you because it seems like it's hard, right? But going south to north, it's like you're going downhill. So, okay, we'll give you a $250 discount. But the reality is, if you go to outer space, there is no up or down. It's not based on anything. And yet, something like a map that we depend upon, that is drawn by someone else, that's not drawn by us, we depend upon it, right? And it's even gotten, it's not only that we depend upon it, nowadays we even submit to it, right? When Google Maps comes up, and it's not just, okay, when it starts saying go left, go right, you're like, samirna wa ta'na, right? We hear, we obey, and we start turning and whatever. So if that's the case, individually, we may have trouble trusting ourselves based on information. And like I said, that's exacerbated in the modern world. If we can't trust ourselves, we can't trust other people necessarily, 100%. What do? Next slide, please. Okay, I should go to the next slide because this was just part of the last one. Okay, let me just remind us of my central thesis. The greater your exposure to beauty, the greater your ability to see truth as it really is. As we venture and we go full steam ahead into this world of the AI revolution, right? You're going to find that this issue becomes more exacerbated. I'll give you a quick example. There's a company out of the Silicon Valley and they're developing a very interesting app. And in this app, basically, what they do is they curate a person's content online. In other words, they take all of your Instagram, Facebook, anything that where you have a digital footprint, and they curate it. They bring it all together. And let's say that this person that they have all this data on has passed away. They'll go to their loved one, and let's say it's your mother. And let's say your mother passed away. And so they'll come to you and they'll say, look, how would you like to speak to your mother? Now, I don't know if you know, but, and I'm sure for the people that are studying engineering to some extent, you know you can take 3 seconds of a person's voice and basically construct an entire conversation. They just need 3 seconds. That's all they need. Okay? Now, that being the case, I want you to imagine something. That you pick up this phone, you go in this app, you pick it up, and then who's on the other line? Your mother that has passed away. And she says, how's everything? Do you remember that one time when we went here and we went to the mainland and we visited California and went to Disney World and you slipped and this and that? And it's her voice. What sort of psychological damage do you think that's going to do to people? Because it's very easy for us to say, oh, I would know the difference. But if you give it long enough, you might even think you're speaking to your mom. For those of you who are engaged with ChatGPT, you start actually having conversations. And I'm saying from personal experience, please provide me with a timeline of the Protestant movement. I'm like, why did I say please? Right? It's just like I'm actually talking to someone. But meaning that our ability to distinguish what is true and what is false is only going to get worse and worse as time goes on, is what I'm trying to say. And therefore, this central thesis that I'm talking about is going to be important. But again, central thesis, the greater your exposure to beauty, the greater your ability to see truth as it really is. Next slide. Okay. So let me take another brief foray into another area, okay? And that is beauty part of our meta language? Now, I need to stop here and explain what I mean by meta language. So anytime you see the word meta, understand it deals with foundations. So when we talk about metaphysical, you have the physical world and then that which is beyond the physical, what the physical world is based upon. When you talk about meta-ethics, so there's ethics, what is right and what is wrong, and then there's what are the ethics built upon? Like, why is it right or wrong? Okay? With language, you also have a type of meta-language, meaning that words are not just infinitely definable. You have to have certain words that you know without defining further. Okay? And so if we look at ethical terms, you have primary words and secondary words. Primary words are generally what we call descriptive, secondary, evaluative. Secondary words that evaluate are part of the meta language, meaning that you can't define them any further. Okay? So you have concepts like generosity, humility. Those are part of your primary or descriptive words. But if you ask the question, okay, is generosity good? You say, okay, yes. Is good good? I mean, it's like a ridiculous question. Good is the evaluative term. Generosity is the descriptive term. So you need to have some terms that are going to be evaluative that you can't necessarily keep on defining, but they give value to other terms. So my question is, good is one of those terms, obviously. Truth is one of those terms, obviously, right? You ask, is this true or is this false? You don't say, is truth true? It's meaningless, right? Is beauty part of our meta language? Next slide. Okay, and I would venture to say that it is. Because you say, why do you believe X? Because it's true. Why do you want Y? Because it's good. Why do you look at Z? Because it's beautiful. In other words, there's nothing beyond that. There's no sort of rational explanation or, let's say, logical proposition that you're going to enter into to now give you beauty. You immediately recognize it. It's not something that you have to have a full, like I said, a logical proposition now prove is beautiful, beautiful. All right, next slide. Okay, so that brings us to another question. Is beauty part of our fitrah? How many people say that beauty is part of our fitrah? Okay, So now we need to kind of delve into this a little bit. Most people, when they think about rationality, they think about rationality into two broad categories. You have things that are rational, things that are irrational. So a concept that's rational is something like, I am Fahad. Simple, rational statement. All right, something that's irrational is something like, I am a married bachelor. How many people think that's true? How many think that's false? You think it's false that I'm a married bachelor? Okay. If I asked you, show me how it's false, what would you say? I said, look, I'm a married bachelor. What's the problem with that? Why can't I be a married bachelor?
Definitions contradicts. Definition of this two word contradicts each other.
Definition, two words that contradict. Okay. Anyone else want to give it a shot? They're opposites. Okay. What if I said, I don't have a problem with two opposite things existing together? I'm okay with that. My feelings are mundane. I'm perfectly okay with it. That's okay. I think contradictions are great. They make life living. So what are you going to do with that? So what you might say, if you're taking philosophy classes and things like that, you say, look, this is, definitional, like you mentioned, right? It's based on a definition. And these concepts of being married and being a bachelor are mutually exclusive, meaning the definition of being married is that you are not single, you're not a bachelor. And the definition of a bachelor means that you're not married and that you are single. And these two things can't exist at the same time. But what if I said, no, I want to be a married bachelor, I am a married bachelor. I don't care about your logical propositions. I don't care about logic. Logic sucks anyways, right? Or something like this. The issue is you can't go any further. So logical principles are part of an area that's outside of rationality, meaning you cannot prove them, but you must know them and start with them. Logical principles are not proven. You start with those principles. And so, rationality doesn't have just two areas. You say something's rational and irrational. There's a third section of rationality, which is what we call the supra-rational. It's outside of rationality. Those things that you know to be true, but you cannot prove. And they have certain terms for these things. They're called either axioms philosophically, or first principles, basic beliefs. And this is across the board, any system of thought. Every system of thought, whether we're talking about Islam, whether we're talking about Christianity, whether we're talking about science, everything has first principles or axioms that you assume, but you cannot prove. For instance, in science, anyone know what an axiom is, or what an axiom in science would be? Something that's axiomatic, that you start with, but you can't prove. Okay, I'll give you one. You start with the assumption, the presupposition that nature is uniform. That is an assumption you start off with. Okay? Now, you could do experiments to show that nature is uniform. If you mix hydrogen and oxygen, what do you get? Water. Okay, one guy. All right. And if I mix it again, what do I get? Water, hydrogen, oxygen. Very simple. I'm not a chemist, so just humor me. If you mix hydrogen and oxygen, you get water. If you mix it again, you get water, more water. Jazakallah khair. And if you mix it again, you get even more water. Jazakallah khair. And if you mix it again, you get even more water. Okay. Will there come a time when you mix it and you get milk? Okay. Are you 100% certain that'll never happen? No. You cannot be 100% certain until you've gone to the end of time. Because what you have now is a concept that nature is uniform. And you've seen it so many times, hydrogen, oxygen, water, hydrogen, oxygen, water, hydrogen, oxygen, water, that now you have a justified belief that nature is uniform. But it's still an assumption. In order for it to be 100% proven, you have to do all the experiments, mix hydrogen, oxygen, all of it in the world, all the way till the end of time. Okay? And you cannot do that. So you start off with an axiom, a first principle, something that is in the supra-rational, which says nature is uniform. And you can apply that across the board, by the way. Experiment after experiment. And really, in philosophy, there's a discussion when we talk about science and the physical world, is it really knowledge or is it just justified belief? But that's a separate question. I don't want to get into that right now. Okay? So, there's 3 categories. There's the super rational, that which is outside of rationality. There's things that are rational, that are very straightforward. And there's the things that are irrational. Now, all of this might be a lot. Okay? So to put it really simply, imagine someone, they come to you and they say, all of this super rational stuff, this is you religious people. This is you trying to prove God or whatever. I only believe in rationality. I won't believe it until you prove it to me. I need proof. How many people have ever heard this before? In order to believe something, you have to have proof, right? And so you say, okay, you're only going to believe things if you have proof. But how far will you extend that? Meaning that the reason you need proof is because you doubt. And if you doubt, what you're essentially asking is, give me evidence. Tell me why. Right? So, and we see this in kids a lot. Like when my son, Abdurrahman, he's the, how do I put this nicely? The animated one in our house. I have 5 kids, so he's, that guy. Anyway, so imagine now, Abdurrahman, he goes to the kitchen and he takes out the knife. And I'm like, Abdurrahman, put that back. What is he going to say? Very good. Why? I heard one person say, he'll say, okay, Baba, and he put it back. I'm like, are you married? He's like, no. I'm like, yeah, exactly. Right? That's why you said that. So he's going to be like, why? And I'm like, okay, because it's sharp. What is he going to say now? Why? Okay, and I'm like, because the manufacturer made it that way. What does he say next? Why? I'm like, okay, well, because it's used for cutting things. Next question. Why? Okay, because when you cut apples, there's more utility. It's easier to eat. Next question. Why? Okay, because when you eat them, it's easier to eat the apples, and therefore you spend a lot. At the end, right, when he keeps going, what's my response? How do I end that? No, I'll tell you how, you and I probably ended the same. How do I end it? Because I said so, and that's why. Khalas, get out of here. Right? That's how I end it. Because here's the thing. You cannot ask why infinitely. When someone says, I need proof, it means they doubt. But if they doubt, they could very well ask for proof of the proof. And once you give them that proof, they could ask for proof of the proof of the proof. And it could go on forever. But the problem is, you cannot doubt forever. You cannot doubt infinitely. Because someone says that if I doubt everything, I have doubt of everything. Is that even possible? Because the problem is, eventually you'll come to a point where if you doubt everything, you have to doubt your doubt. Which leaves you intellectually paralyzed. You can't go anywhere after that, right? So there has to be at least one thing that you know for sure that you cannot prove in order for the whole of rationality to even work. Okay? To give you a simple analogy, imagine someone comes to you and says, I have the perfect solvent. You guys know what a solvent is, right? It dissolves things. So suppose I have the perfect solvent. It'll dissolve anything. You just put it on, take it to your bathroom, it cleans the tiles, that black stuff in between it. Boom, good, gone. It'll dissolve anything, man. It's perfect. Okay, you could have the perfect solvent, but you still need a bottle to keep it in. You still need something that is absolute. That which is not soluble, that which is not solvable. You need at least one thing that is absolute, that is not soluble, that you can't solve. Okay? And that's perhaps why one of the names of Allah, Allahu Samad, Allah the Absolute, right? That nothing is beyond that after that, right? There's no sort of solving that. Okay? So, that being the case, now it's gotten very philosophical. So go to the next slide so I can bring it back down to some Islamic nomenclature here. Okay. When we talk about these things, this is the Islamic terminology, all right? So I gave you the philosophical terminology. When we talk about that which is outside of rationality, that is what we call the fitrah. And that which is rationality itself is called aql, and that which is irrational may be like something like ghayr aqli or something. All right, next slide. Okay. Actually, I thought I had another slide in there. Okay, khair. All right. Everyone understand rationality? Clear? So go to the last one real quick before I get to this one. Okay. So we understand rational principles are part of the fitrah. What I'm arguing is that beauty is also part of the fitrah. It is not a logical conundrum that you have to solve. If I go off with my wife and I say, honey, the sunset is absolutely beautiful, and she turns to me and says, I think it's absolutely ugly, prove to me rationally that that's a beautiful sunset. It's not a rational question. It comes by way of, it's part of your fitrah. It's direct. Okay? All right, now let's go to the next slide. Okay, so a couple of platitudes. This is from Roger Scruton. And he says that there's 6 of them. So he says, number 1, beauty pleases us. Number 2, one thing can be more beautiful than another. Beauty is always a reason to attending to a thing that possesses it. Beauty is a subject matter of a judgment, the judgment of taste. The judgment of taste is about the beautiful object, not about the subject's state of mind. And number 6, nonetheless, there is no secondhand judgments of beauty. In other words, you can't convince someone rationally whether something is beautiful or not, like I just said. Okay? And these 6 platitudes kind of break that down. Next slide. All right. So the other aspect I want to touch upon here is that beauty itself is connected to meaning. That when you experience beauty, it's not just an experience. It's attached to some sort of meaning in some way. Okay? So for instance, if you look at like what we call aesthetic versus utilitarian interest. Let's say you're invited to dinner and they set the table for you like this, right? They went out of their way, they decorated it, nice plates, nice decoration on the table, the napkins are arranged in a certain way, the glasses, and everything looks beautiful. So you go to this person's house, and then you go to another person's house, and they're like a bunch of paper plates, paper cups, a couple of plastic spoons, and they've got like those those tinfoil trays. All right, and are we going to have the same experience? Not that the food in the tin tray might taste better, but I'm saying visually, are you going to have the same experience? No, you will not, right? On one hand, in the first case, there is something that's additional. Case number 2 was perhaps purely utilitarian interest, meaning that this is basically how do we get the food into the person as quick as possible, right? Or something like this. In the first case, there's something more to it. The host wants you perhaps to have something that is beyond just the flavor of the food. And so the meaning behind that perhaps may be that they care about your visual pleasure as well. But it has some sort of connection to meaning. Next slide. Okay, this one I got into a bit of trouble. Actually, where's the image is gone. No, image is here. Okay, khalas. Art versus entertainment. Now this one's a bit tricky. So for those of you guys know, that's Marvel, that's DC. Back when this was popular, there's this idea of entertainment, and entertainment that you consume just for a temporary pleasure. And this pleasure is temporary. Versus art, where you look at it and it signifies something. So entertainment, by and large, is something that's relatively quick. Okay? And I'm talking here about like movies and stuff like this. Okay? Meaning, it doesn't have a long-term effect, and it doesn't really give you much in terms of meaning, generally. I mean, there may be some films where there is meaning into it and so on and so forth. But generally, entertainment, especially nowadays, it's quick. It's to kind of give you invoke certain pleasure centers, and it's out. Whereas art, when you look at a painting, there's the intent of the painter. And there's a meaning behind that. What did the painter intend? What was his ambition? What was her backdrop? Why did she paint this landscape? And so on and so forth. So there's a difference between art and entertainment as well. Next slide. Okay, the final one, which I think kind of seals the deal when I'm talking about beauty being connected to meaning, is when we look at literary works. In other words, when we compare prose and poetry. So what's the difference between prose and poetry? Anyone know? What's prose? What's prose? Text.
Text.
It's very, it's the idea behind prose is to get you the information in the most effective way possible, right? That is prose. So my example up there is an organic chemistry textbook, right? That is the quintessential work of prose, okay? And then you have poetry. And up here I have Emily Dickinson's poem. And it's actually quite good. I mean, she says, hope is the thing with feathers that perches on the soul and sings the time without words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chilliest land and the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. You see, the difference between prose and poetry is that with poetry, you could go back to it. You have a certain pleasure when you read it. It signifies something very deep inside of you. So you could go back to it over and over to experience that pleasure. But how many people, be honest, went back to their organic chemistry textbook after they graduated? Be honest. Nobody. You did? You're a chemist. Okay, khalas, you're not a part of this discussion. But by and large, for those of us who didn't study chemistry beyond that, we took that organic chemistry textbook back when they used to have textbooks, now they don't, and we said, okay, ma salama, you're out, right? Gone. Why? Because efficiency of information versus pleasure. And this is connected to something that has to do with the person's meaning and meaning within yourself. Okay, next slide. Okay, so a couple of things when we talk about a poem, and this is the heresy of paraphrase. And for those who speak more than one language, so, if you speak one or two or three, you'll probably be able to see this right away. Number one, poetry can express several thoughts at the same time. Number two, it's polysemous, meaning is conveyed on several different levels. So the poem on one part of your life, you would read it as a 20-year-old, and you come back to it as a 30-year-old, you may take something else from it, right? And then as a 40-year-old, you take something else from it. Okay, so it's multi-layered, multi-leveled. Meaning is lost in any paraphrase. In other words, when you paraphrase a poem, there's the pleasure of the meaning, the sensation of the meaning, but then the sensation of the cadence, the rhetoric, the linguistic devices that are applied is lost. And you'll see this especially when you do translations. So people that can translate or that know more than one language, if there's a poem in your mother tongue, whatever that may be, and you try to translate it into a second language, immediately it's lost. Or to give you, I don't know, I guess people don't really read poems anymore. If you try to tell a joke in a different language, we know it's gone, right? And the guy just looks at you and said, yeah, I guess you had to be there, right? Or whatever it is. Okay, next slide. So, I want to make a distinction here, however, that there's a difference between man-made beauty and natural beauty. Because we have this concept in modernity that beauty is subjective. Now the thing is, I would say yes, it's subjective if we're talking about man-made beauty, poetry that's written by man, or art that's composed by a human being. But when it comes to natural beauty, I'm bringing this forward that in fact is objective. And why is it objective? Even though both of them are attached to meaning, by the way. So the work of a person and the work that's just pure natural, they both have meaning. But with man-made art and man-made beauty, it could be subjective. While when it comes to natural beauty, it's objective. All right? Next slide. Why do I say this? Because if we look at something like a painting, so this is a painting of the Niagara Falls. Anyone been to the Niagara Falls? One person?
No.
Okay, a few people. Canada or America? Okay. Who's been to only America? Only the American side? Khalas, you haven't gone to Niagara Falls then. Like, you need to go to the Canadian side, man. And I'm saying that as an American. Anyways, okay. So this is a painting of the Niagara Falls. A couple of things you'll notice. It is subjective because it is subject to the vantage point of the person painting it. Meaning this is the lenses by which they're seeing it. So there's a framing. It's limited. And it's limited to the person who's painting it. It is subject to their vantage point. Next slide. If you actually visit the Niagara Falls, there is no subjectivity because you're taking it directly in. It's not subject to anyone's vantage point. It's not framed. It is vast. And you take it all in. And when you take it all in, it is part of the natural process that it does something to you. That is what I'm arguing is objective. Okay? So the first case with the painting, it's got framing, it's from the vantage point of a person, but when it comes to you directly experiencing natural beauty, there is no framing. It is not from the vantage point of someone else, it's directly you and your vantage point. And by the way, marketers know this very well, right? They always understand that natural stuff, you have this intuition that is just good, right? That's why they're trying to sell you natural creams and natural cereal and natural whatever, natural clothing. Why? Why are they doing that? Because they understand this fitri concept very well, perhaps more than we do. That something about the natural world is good and pure. It's unbiased. It's not trying to hoodwink you, right? The natural world is not going to be like, haha, gotcha. But with man-made objects, again, it's subject to the person that's doing it. And so you're limited. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so experience of naturing, painting picture of nature, framing human angle and bias. Nature, it's vast, open, endless, no human angle, not contained, and makes you feel small. That's the other aspect when you have the natural world. It makes you feel small. When I had asked about looking at the Kaaba for the first time, it's not only that you can't express it, but there's something about it that has grandeur. When you go to the Niagara Falls, it is massive, and you feel small in a certain way. Okay? Next slide. Okay, so what exactly is awe? So now let's bring a little nerdiness into this. All right, so awe has been defined as an emotional response to perceptually vast stimuli that overwhelms current mental structures, yet facilitate attempts at accommodation. That's the technical definition that social scientists and social psychologists bring on. And this comes from a very specific study by Michelle Shiota, I think is her name, and Dacno Keltner. Okay, next slide. So there were a couple studies done on this. Well, before we get to the studies. So remember my initial thesis, I said awe leads, so what I was saying, that awe leads to a decrease in ego and heightened cognition. So remember, I started all of this off with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he juxtaposed two things, beauty and arrogance. So what I'm saying now is that the more exposure to beauty a person has, the lower your ego will be, okay? And the higher cognition will be. You'll be able to think more clear, is what I'm trying to say, okay? And by the way, is ego an impediment to truth?
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, in our own tradition, we know that some of the people that rejected Islam didn't do it because they didn't, they thought it was irrational, or they didn't understand the logic behind it. They did it purely based on ego, right? You can do like Fir'aun, right? Or let's say Abu Jahl. When Abu Jahl was asked, don't you believe that this man, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, don't you believe he's a prophet? So what did he say? Did he say, oh, you see, it doesn't rationally make sense to me, because if he was a prophet, X, Y, he gave all it. No, his answer was very straightforward. He said that he comes from Banu Hashim. I am part of Banu Makhzum. We have had this competition for generations. They would feed the Hujjaj, we would feed the Hujjaj. They would give the water to the Hujjaj, we would give water. So it's a competition. And now they are claiming that they have a prophet sent by Allah. How can we compete with that? I will never accept it. So what was it, a rational argument? No, 100% ego. And if that's not good enough, the quintessential kafir is shaitan. All right? Shaitan, the same being that has more knowledge than all of us, by the way, who saw things, who conversed with Allah, who saw the angels, all of them prostrating to Adam alayhi salam. That shaitan What was his problem?
Ego.
Ego. Right? Ana khayrun min. I'm better than him. Why should I prostrate to Adam? Nothing to do with rationality. So ego is is one of the main impediments for a person accepting the truth, even more than rationality. And just on another point, a lot of times when, let's say, we're having conversations with people and we get into debates and things like that, a lot of times we're trying to touch their rational side and we make assumptions about them. We make assumptions that they're rational robots. If I just bring the right argument, I will convince them about Islam. And the reality is that could be the last thing the person needs. He just needs you to go out, take him out for some pizza, and just kind of, it's something deeper than that. We were talking, like he was mentioning the book that I wrote on No Doubt. We run this service called Lighthouse Mentoring. It's a free service. Anyone in the world can come online for a 1-hour free session over Zoom. And there are 3 target groups: people that are doubting Islam, people that have left Islam, and people that want to know how to deal with those first 2 categories. And we just added a 4th category, which is new Muslim mentorship. Anyways, we have been doing this for 4 years. And I've spoken to the mentors, we've collected the data, and over the last 4 years, I can tell you, 80 to 90% of the people and the calls that we get that have people that have left Islam or people that are doubting Islam, it's not based on a rational problem. It is something that is beyond that. A family problem, problem with upbringing, something else. And so a lot of times we make assumptions about the people we're talking to. Someone says, I'm a Christian, you jump on them, tell them, let me tell you 55,000 things wrong with the Bible. Okay, khalas. You don't know anything about the guy. You don't know if he's even reads the Bible. Okay? Anyway, sorry, that's my own soapbox there. Okay, so remember I said, this is just a reminder about the hadith, no one will enter paradise who has an atom's weight of arrogance in his heart. What if a man likes his clothes to look good and his shoes to look good? Allah is beautiful and he loves beauty. Arrogance means denying the truth and looking down upon people. Next slide. Okay, quickly going over some of the studies. How much time do I have left?
15 minutes.
50 or 15?
15.
15.
Around 20 minutes.
Okay, all right. They said 50. I was like, Allahu Akbar, this is great. I'm going too fast. All right. So one study that was done is that they took a group of subjects, some participants in the study, and they took them up to a certain mountainous area in Northern California. And a second group was placed in a room that was just kind of black and white, not black and white, but gray, drab, like an office building. And what they did is they had all of these participants listen to a story for 5 minutes. Okay, now the story was about some sort of romantic encounter. Some guy takes a woman out, they go for dinner, they have this and that. And after this 5-minute story, they ask the question, they say, was there a candle on the table in the story? Now, one of the things when we think about cognition, part of our cognition is that we fill in the blanks. So when you read, you fill in the blanks in a certain sense. You don't read every single word, by the way, right? Even within speech, you don't necessarily say everything. So if I say, I spoke to New York yesterday, now does that mean I spoke to the entire city of New York yesterday? No, you understand that I spoke to a particular person, but you fill that in cognitively. You filled in the cognitive blanks. It's even a function of our language. It's called ellipsis, if you're interested in the technical term. And you have lots of these. Put the tea on the stove. Okay, that doesn't mean take the tea leaves and go and throw it on the stove and turn on the fire. No, obviously I mean put the tea leaves in the kettle, put the kettle, put some water, and all of that is filled in, okay? So we had these cognitive gaps that we automatically fill in. So in this story, they're asked, was there a candle on the table? Now, if you are familiar with general, romantic dinners, whatever it is, you may fill that in, but the correct answer was there was no candle on the table, as the person is describing the story. That was the correct answer, okay? So what they found is that people that were exposed to the natural world, in other words, this place on a high mountaintop, wherever they took them, they answered correctly more often than not. So maybe it was like 70, 80%, something like that. Whereas when they compared it to the people that are in the room, that was actually under 50%. Okay? Again, reflecting in the study that your environment has an impact on you. Next slide. Is that it? That's the end of my slides.
Let's see.
No, one more. Wait, that's too much. Wait, keep going. Wait a minute. Okay, yeah, hold on. This is another, so that was cognition. So remember, in my thesis I had said, the more exposed to the natural world you are, the heightened your cognition will be. That was my first part of my thesis. Second part has to do with awe. Okay? So now, remember, we said that experiencing awe, you feel small. So when you see a large mountain, you have this feeling of being small. And part of that feeling of being small, you have a type of fear. Again, it's not a fear that you're running for your life, but it's a type of fear. And fear doesn't really do it justice, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying, okay? And that's what we call awe, by and large. Okay, so there's another study that was done called Awe in the Small Self. Subjects were asked to draw themselves in a cosmopolitan environment and in mountainous environments. When they drew themselves in a cosmopolitan environment, they drew themselves equal to the landmarks, right? So you see that drawing right there? You see how the landmark, that's San Francisco, and you see the two people there. So notice how they're the same size. When they drew themselves on the mountainous one, I don't know if the next slide, does the next slide have the, no it doesn't. Okay, go back, sorry. Just trust me on this. I can send you the references if you want it. When people on the mountaintops drew themselves, they drew themselves much smaller. And when they were asked questions about generosity, right? Would you now help people? Would you do this? Would you do that? They were found to be more generous. The group that was on the mountaintop or in the mountainous area was more or less self-centered. Questions related to generosity, meaning questions related to helping others and things like that, they answered those more positively as compared to the people that were in the metropolitan area. Again, it's a reflection of the idea that when you're exposed to natural beauty, your ego is going to go down. All right, next slide. Actually, I'm going to go to the next one. Okay, so what was my central thesis? The greater your exposure to beauty, the greater your ability to see truth as it really is. Okay, now, we see the hadith that juxtaposes two concepts. We saw kind of the concept of beauty itself and how it's part of the fitrah. And we saw some, secular studies in this domain as well. So I think that the thesis in and of itself is relatively strong, okay? Because in order to see truth, you have to have something more than rationality. And this is why when you go to the Quran, you will find there's a link between spirituality and rationality. Okay? For those of you who have studied the Quran, for instance, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He says, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءِ, verily those who have khushu', those who have this awe, this fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are the ulama. Again, two concepts. Khashya, this fear of Allah, this awe of Allah, combined with ulama, ilm, knowledge. And you see this over and over and over and over again in the Quran. Because truth is not just a rational kind of box. You need spirituality. And that's why, I believe it was Abdullah ibn Masud, who described the companions, and he said that they are people of piety who learn, and because of their knowledge, they become more pious. So it's piety upon knowledge and knowledge upon piety. It is circular, one upon the other. And one part of that, spirituality is being connected to the natural world. That is why when you look at the Sharia, it brings you back to the natural base state over and over and over and over again. Okay? There's a very famous book that was written, not a famous book, but it's probably one of those books that I bought and maybe nobody else did. It's called Will My Cat Eat My Eyes Out? Anyone read this book? No, I didn't think so. Okay. It's a very strange title, Will My Cat Eat My Eyes Out? And it was written by a mortician by the name of Kathleen Doty. And she writes, you know what a mortician is? A mortician is someone that takes like the dead body, dresses it up, waxes it, cleans it up, and so people, when they come to visit, And so she has some interesting points. She says, Americans, this is her words, are the most death illiterate people on the planet. They don't want to talk about death. In fact, even in our language, how we approach it, to go to someone, and say, oh, I heard your uncle, you wouldn't say, I heard your uncle died. It's a bit uncouth, rude. You would say something like, I heard your uncle passed. I heard your uncle's no longer with us. I'm sorry for the loss of your uncle who's no longer with us. You don't say he died. It sounds very rough, okay? So even in our language, so she says, and she wanted to interview people about their, what they thought about death. But her problem is nobody wanted to talk to her, okay? I mean, obviously you have someone that's asking about death. It's the last thing. So she said, I started to interview children. And she says, children are honest. They'll say, things even when their parents don't want them to say things, right? For those of us who have children. So she said, I'd ask children, tell me about questions you have about death. Okay? Some very interesting questions. For instance, one kid asked, what happens if someone dies on a plane? So what happens? Does anyone know, by the way? If you're on this 14-hour flight to New Zealand or something, and the guy next to you, pluck, collapses. Okay, what happens? What do they do with them? Yeah. But they're dead. There's no helping. They've already been declared dead. So my question is, what do they do with the body? That's my question. Not what do they do with it. What do they do? It stays in the seat. They take a little cloth, and for the next 10 hours, you're sitting next to a corpse. Okay? Which I didn't know. I thought they must have a place in the back or something where they take this guy and it's just for another 10 hours, imagine the guy being next to him. You'd be so oh my God, he's dead. Anyway, so questions like that. So one of those questions was, by a kid, will my cat eat my eyes out? If I die, will he eat the eyes out of me? That's why the book's called that. Now, why am I mentioning that? Because when it comes to something like death, and it comes to the Sharia, you have to understand that the Sharia connects you in a very deep way to death. So if you have a loved one that's passed away, and you're close, and you're a close relative, you have to wash their body. That is a very visceral experience. It means it's putting you face to face with something that's direct, that's natural, if we want to put it in those terms. And it's a very visceral experience. I know because, my father passed away, Allah yarhamhu. I took my sons, all three of them, and I said, you're going to come with us to wash the body. I made sure they did that because I wanted them to have that experience, right? And the Sharia does that. When you go off for Eid al-Adha, one of the things you should do is slaughter the animal. Why? Again, it gives you a direct experience of death, right? That a lot of times, modernity doesn't allow you to engage with. When it comes to the salah timings, how do we determine them? Anyone know? So most people do this. Yep, it's time, right? But if you open classical books of fiqh, is that how you're supposed to do it? Of course not. How do you do it? Based on the sun, based on the shadow, and that's how you determine times. When it comes to actually I'm not going to bring that up. I don't know what you guys go with in terms of moon sighting or whatever, so I'll leave that one out there before I get in trouble. So, but you understand, and I could give example after example after example, how our Sharia is constantly taking us back to the natural world. And there's a reason for that. It's spirituality and the natural world and being connected to it such that you have knowledge upon piety and piety upon knowledge. That's why when you go to the Quran over and over again, it's encouraging you. Allah is encouraging you to engage with the natural world. إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ. Right? In the creation of the heavens and the earth and the alteration of the night and the day are indeed signs. لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. For the people that have lub, that think deeply. And as we now move forward into a world that's getting more and more technical, more and more, into this world of technopoly, right? For lack of a better term, you're going to find, in order to understand what's true and what's not true, you'll have to come back to the natural world. And there's one other thing you'll have to come back to, and that is the Quran, by the way. And this is a section that I couldn't really get into. But part of beauty, there's a part of the Quran that is beautiful as well. And I don't mean the meaning. A lot of us approach the Quran as a text of prose. Like if you want to know the ruling on something or something like this, or you're getting it for information purposes. But understand that it has multi-layers, just like a poem. Like if you took, I'll give you an example. Actually, this is a really big box I probably should not open now. I'll give you the example, and then if you want to ask me about it, you can ask about it. When you look at something like the sensation of sound, you hear these stories sometimes that, a non-Muslim heard an ayah of the Quran and they converted to Islam, right? And some of these sound really unbelievable sometimes. Like they heard what? ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ خلاص. They became Muslim. You're like, come on, dude. Like, how is that? That's not even a thing. But you hear these stories. And what's really interesting is that sound in our tradition and part of the Arabic language has meaning. When you look at Western languages, and let's start with Greek, the smallest unit of sound is called a phoneme, but they're meaningless. The smallest unit of sound in the Arabic language, right, has meaning. They're momenic, as this known. So your phonemes and monemes. And so because the sound has meaning, the sound itself can convey something. So let me give an example because it's getting really abstract now. If we look at Surah Al-Fatiha, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, right? That Allah is the most merciful and the infinitely merciful, okay? Something like this. Now, the word Rahman, it falls on a certain verb form, which is the fa'lan form, okay? And words that fall on this form signify something that is heavy and something that is a lot of quantity, okay? And they're relatively heavy in meaning. So if you say that I am, when you look at the word for anger, ghadban, doesn't mean you're angry, it means you're really angry, like intensely angry, okay? Then you have ar-Rahim, which is on the fa'il form. Words on this form signify something of longevity and permanence. So if you, for instance, tawil, someone that's tall is tall. They're not going to be tall one day, short the next, and tall the next. That's their state. They're tall. So when it comes to these terms, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Ar-Rahman is like if you're standing on the shore of the beach, right? You guys probably know this very clearly. And these waves are overcoming you, like with intensity. It's like the mercy of Allah is like that. It's just overwhelmingly merciful. Like with a heaviness, a lot of it. That is Ar-Rahman. Ar-Rahim is that mercy that you couldn't live without it even for a second. Every aspect of your life, you have to have Allah's mercy, right? Your heart is beating right now because of Allah's mercy. You're breathing right now because of Allah's mercy. And that's long. Now, why am I mentioning this? You might have already studied this. I'm saying that this is connected with its recitation, the sound. Because when you recite, Ar-Rahman, there's a heaviness in it. And when you recite Ar-Rahim, there's elongation. Heaviness and elongation that's built into the sound as well as the meaning that you get. So you have this beautiful combination of prose and poetry. And that's why the scholars say the Quran is neither prose nor poetry, but it's in a separate category in and of itself. Okay? So, that is me leading to the Quran, natural beauty, and my central thesis. So I don't know, do we have time for questions or are we done?
No, we can continue. Do you want to?
No, that's it. I think if I open up a whole section, we'll need to be here for another 2-3 hours.
Okay, but you have time.
2-3 hours?
No, you have like 5 more minutes, then we can go to question and Q&A.
5 more minutes? No, let's just go straight to the Q&A because this is a good stopping point. Otherwise, like I said, I'll have to open up another can of worms.
So we have 20 minutes around for Q&A.
Oh, wow.
While you guys are come out with questions, I can do the first one.
So by the way, I you know why I like Q&A? Because there's a couple dynamics of Q&A. So the way I do Q&A is that either you ask me questions or I ask you questions. So if I don't get questions, it means the lecture was absolutely phenomenal or was absolutely horrible.